This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 29 of Season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, July 22nd, 1911, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the Westford Center section. Mrs. J. Herbert Fletcher, who was spending a vacation at Francistown, New Hampshire, and Ludlow, Vermont, was summoned from the former place to attend the funeral of her cousin, Charles H. Shepherd. It's spelled S-H-E-P-E-R-D in this article, but I think Charles would have spelled it S-H-E-P-A-R-D. On Monday, the funeral is held on Monday in Lowell. Mr. Shepherd's death was particularly sad as he was a young man in the prime of life with a good business. He leaves a devoted wife to mourn his loss. He underwent an operation for appendicitis from which he failed to rally. J. Herbert Fletcher was one of the bearers at the funeral services. P. Henry Harrington of Graniteville has the contract for the building of the new house Walter J. Merritt is building for his aunt, Mrs. Tyler of Arlington. The three little children of Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Anderson, Carl, Eric, and Dorothy, were operated upon at their home on Tuesday for adenoid growth. Dr. Varney of North Chelmsford was the attending physician. That sounds like a surgery that we wouldn't do anymore. Miss Harriet Hodgman of Belmont has been reviewing old associations and visiting Miss Emily F. Fletcher this past week. More on Miss Hodgman in a moment. The Thimble Club held a pleasant gathering last week, Thursday afternoon, in the Grove at Whitney Park. There was a good attendance of the members and several special guests invited for the occasion. Mrs. Edward Fisher was the hostess for the afternoon and served most attractive refreshments. Miss Mary Moran is at home after 9 weeks of absence in Littleton and Lowell at her nursing. She was a nurse and often stayed with people continuously until they were well. Mr. Newcomb and Miss Amy Newcomb have been at Mrs. A.S. Wright's this week. E.S. Raymond, whose gracious beneficence to the J.V. Fletcher Library has been so much appreciated by his friends, has presented 2 vases which ornament the reading room, or rather one is a jar with cover simulating a vase. This is of French Delft and the other of Chinese crackleware. The dry weather has pushed the berry crop right along, and those having fields of berries are busy harvesting them. Even if rains come, the crop at best will be shortened both in quality and quantity. Notwithstanding the dry season, reports come from numerous households of a real pest of mosquitoes. Will E. Wright has charge of teaming the produce over the road to Boston, the same as last year. Many of the berry and fruit farmers of Westford had their produce teamed to Quincy Market in Boston. This was usually a very early morning trip to get the produce to the market before it opened. The next section is called Annual Field Day. It's one paragraph. The members of the Spalding Light Cavalry Association held a recent meeting at their building on Boston Road. That's now the house at number 20 Boston Road, and made further arrangements for the annual Field Day and Reunion, which is to take place in Westford on Thursday, August 10th at Whitney Park. It will be an all-day affair, and every effort will be made to make it the same delightful occasion as heretofore. A ball game and a clay pigeon shoot will be part of the program of sports. Can you imagine having a clay pigeon shoot at Whitney Playground today? They use shotguns for those. A band, probably the Chelmsford Band, will be in attendance through the day. The men of the Unitarian Church will have charge of the dinner and expect to match their achievement in this direction of last season. They plan to provide for 200. The following committees are in charge: John Feeney, Edward Fisher, and Captain Sherman Fletcher, dinner; Sergeant John Wilson, C.E. Bartlett, Lieutenant Quigley, music. Alfred W. Hartford, John H. Fletcher, Albert Kemp, it's A. Kemp, but I think it's Albert, C.L. Smith, George M. Wright, George O. Jackson, and Robert Ford's sports, Captain Wilson, Captain Monahan, and Captain Fletcher, speakers. The next section is the About Town section. As evidence of the extreme dryness of the drought, the Prairie Farm, which lieth 1/4 mile north by northeast of Stony Brook School on the Lowell Road, put in a pipeline to supply the farm with water 40 years ago, and which has proved a never-failing supply until the rainless 1911. The pipeline of supply is now on wheels from Stony Brook to farm buildings. At least this is being used as the reserve resort while the other has time to gather volume. Miss Harriet Hodgman, a former teacher in Westford Academy and daughter of the late Reverend Edwin R. Hodgman, the town historian, is in town with Miss Emily Fletcher, and viewing the changes time hath decreed on the works of his hand. Reverend Hodgman also served as town clerk, and he wrote the history of Westford history of the town of Westford in 1883, which is today the definitive history of Westford to that date. Reprints of this excellent history are available at the Westford Museum. Colonel Edwin D. Metcalf and wife and a friend were in town on Sunday and attended the Unitarian Church. With Otto, they are on their way to their seashore resort. He is the donor of the Soldiers Monument, what we refer to as our Civil War Monument, at the intersection of Boston Road and Hildreth Street. The memorial window in the Unitarian Church, which he also donated, and the president of the Consolidated American Vehicle and Implement Company, with a capital of $900 million. Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin, her maiden name is Bertha Prescott, and Miss McDonald of Boston, Reverend Louis F. Havermale of Graniteville, and Fred A. Snow of West Chelmsford have been forgetting the troubles of flies, mosquitoes, and hot weather, and the fast changes of lawn tennis on the old Oaken Bucket farm. That's Samuel Taylor's farm. His sons were tennis players. The funeral of Thomas H. Murray took place from the residence on the Concord Road on Friday afternoon of last week. Reverend Benjamin Bailey of the Unitarian Church conducted the services. There was a large gathering of relatives and friends who appropriately contributed flowers effective in design. The bearers were Orrin, Fred, Marshall, and George Murray, William Wilder, and William Wayne. Burial was in West Lawn Cemetery under the direction of George E. Gould. George H. Holt, the well-known pump manufacturer of West Chelmsford, who has been ill for several months, has joined his family at the summer resort at Pigeon Cove, which I believe is in Rockport, Mass. And later they will go to their new bungalow at Chelmsford Center. Mrs. Elizabeth Dame and daughter Bessie of Lowell have been visiting their cousins at the old Oaken Bucket farm. The Oasis Pond on the Prairie Farm has gone entirely dry, and the desert plateau between Pond and Stony Brook is marked with the trail of the snake, turtle, and frog looking for irrigation. Tadmuck Brook, which usually has a supply for these immigrants, has felt the weather pressure and gone dry from Main Street on through Tadmuck Swamp. All the ponds and lakes in town are extremely low with the illness of the weather. Mrs. Samuel L. Taylor and Mrs. Martin Taylor Howard are visiting Mrs. Gertrude. I think that should actually be Martha Taylor Howard, not Martin Taylor Howard. Are visiting Mrs. Gertrude Burt Cutler in Andover. And next we have an obituary. A more complete account of the life of Dr. George Francis Harwood than time would permit to give in last week's Wardsman will undoubtedly prove interesting to all his friends in Westford and elsewhere. He was born in Westford, the son of Deacon Ephraim and Louisa Cook Harwood. His father will be remembered as superintendent of the Sunday school, deacon and leader of the choir in the Congregational Church, and had his home, farm, and wheelwright shop at Brookside. Dr. Harwood attended the Nabnasset School and later the Old Stony Brook School and Westford Academy. As a scholar, he was studious, thoughtful, punctual. As a playmate, he was retiring and kept aloof from the roughish element of recess sports. He preferred the quiet inspiration of books to the noisy tumble and toss of school sports. Dr. Harwood went to Worcester in 1864 and was one of the most skillful dentists of the city, where he practiced for 40 years when ill health compelled him to retire. He was a drummer in a boys' military company at Brookside, and afterwards was a real drummer in the real Civil War, being a member of George H. Ward Post, Grand Army of the Republic of Worcester. He was also a member of Ancaria Lodge, IOOF, which is the Order of Odd Fellows. He leaves a widow, Mrs. Fanny B. Harwood, a granddaughter of Osgood Bradley, the well-known car manufacturer. Mr. Harwood served as a private and musician in Company F of the 4th Massachusetts Heavy Artillery from 1864 to 65 in the Civil War. Although Dr. Harwood had been in ill health for several years, the immediate cause of his death was heart disease and heat prostration, which occurred at Worcester on Monday, July 10th, aged 63 years, 5 months, and 5 days. The funeral took place on Wednesday afternoon from the residence 332 Highland Street. Reverend Dr. Vincent E. Thompson of the First Universalist Church conducting the services. The burial was last week Thursday afternoon at Fairview Cemetery, Westford, under the direction of Undertaker David L. Grieg. Next we have the Forge Village section. Services were held at St. Andrew's Mission at the usual hour on Sunday afternoon. Reverend Leon Field of Fitchburg was the officiating clergyman who will conduct the services on next Sunday. Felix Leclerc is building an addition to his cottage on Story Street. The Mrs. Holt of Andover are visiting at the home of their aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Prescott. Mrs. Prescott's maiden name was Henrietta Holt, and she went by Etta. The many friends of Mrs. Chester Blodgett of Groton will be pained to hear that she is confined to her home with a broken wrist sustained by a fall last Wednesday. Mrs. Celia Wilkinson is visiting friends and relatives in Lowell. The John Edwards Hose Company are practicing for the annual field day to be held here on August 5th. A fine program of sports has been arranged. The Abbott Worsted Company will close their mill on July 29th for a vacation of 1 week. The mill will resume operation on August 5th at the usual hour. Many are taking advantage of the blueberry season, which is now open. Although the berries are not as plentiful as previous years, owing to the dry weather, many return well paid for their labor. Fred Naylor spent Wednesday in Boston. Next, we have a couple of items from Ayer, or a couple paragraphs from Ayer, from the Ayer District Court. Last Saturday was a busy day in the district court, an afternoon session being necessary to dispose of the business which was brought before it to transact. Thomas Bast, James Morst, M-O-R-S-T, Michael Dennis, D-E-N-E-S, Albert Hope, Aaron Orner, John Korst, K-O-R-S-T, and Joe Dennis, all of Forge Village, were in court on a continuance for indecent exposure. The specific complaints against them was bathing in a public place in a nude condition. The court found all guilty and imposed a fine of $3. I presume that's $3 apiece. The defendants are all Poles, spelled with a little p, but that's a reference to their nationality. They were Polish immigrants. And according to the testimony of Officer Sullivan of Westford, who caused the arrest to be made, were wanted were warned at different times to stop the practice, but the warning was unheeded. John M. and Frank J. Mahoney represented the defendants, and Representative Edward Fisher of Westford was the prosecuting attorney in behalf of the town of Westford. And that's the news in Westford for the week ending July 22nd, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.